Okay, we're going to go to Tanya now. We are at the end of Perek Chav Beis. In the English Tanya, it's Chav Ches on top, 94 at the bottom. Okay. The last thing we were learning last week is why Hashem's speech is still called speech. And we said because even though in reality it doesn't exist, I mean, the words of Hashem never left it. So really nothing exists. But Hashem's greatness is he made it in a way that world thinks it exists. And therefore we were saying Elokim Achedim means they get from external level of God over the shoulder, they get the lifeline over the shoulder from Hashem, or Elokim Achedim, that other people make them gods. Okay? The bottom line is what's relevant to finishing this chapter, moving on, is evil is an existence that it maintains itself as an existence, even though realistically it's not. And he says, what's the uniqueness of evil in a negative way? What's the unique evil of evil? They elevate themselves. They say, I made denial. I made myself, like Pari said. Or they elevate themselves like an eagle to say, basically haughtiness. The only vessel for godliness is bittul, humility, subjugation. Something which is subjugated and bottled to Hashem is holy. If it's not bottled to Hashem, it's not. And therefore, Dr. Rebbe is going to explain now beautifully, that's why haughtiness is idol worshipping, the Gemara says. And we're going to see this inside. Chav Ches on the top, 94 at the bottom, 3 lines in the top of the page, the third line. Based on what we just said before, that holiness means it's a vessel for godliness. It's not full of itself. If it's full of itself, there's no room for God. The home for God is bittul, empty, nothingness, meaning I don't feel myself to be a separate entity from Hashem. Therefore, Chazal say, Shegas is ruach, that haughtiness, shkula kaveh dezara mamish. Haughtiness is mamish like idol worship. Later on in Tanya, the same Gemara, by the way, not exactly the same page, but the Gemara also says anger is also avodah zarah. Kol hakoyes, it's not really a Gemara. The Chazal say, Kol hakoyes ki'ilu eved avodah zarah. You get angry, it's like worshiping idols. So the Gemara, what we're saying is like this: haughtiness is idol worshiping, and anger is idol worshiping. Now here, Dr. Rebbe is not going to talk about anger; he's talking about haughtiness, and I'll show you the way really they're exactly the same thing. Haughtiness and anger are synonymous. Anger is because of haughtiness, and therefore both are idol worshiping. Says why? Is equal to avodah zarah. Why? The primary and root of idol worshiping is it considers itself a separate entity, separated from the sanctity of Hashem. And he says, haughtiness doesn't mean you say God doesn't exist. And he says, like the Gemara says, the Goyim call God the God of the gods. They don't deny the existence of God. They just stick a God along the way. So Alter Rebbe is saying like this: when the Gemara says haughtiness is idol worshiping, idol worshiping doesn't mean you deny God's existence. What Alter Rebbe is going to explain now, what avodah zarah means, idol worshiping means, there is an entity which is not God. That is idol worshiping. That's what he explained before. In reality, there's no existence but Hashem. And therefore, when it says, you should know today, you say, Nolenu. God is God in heaven above and the earth below. There is no other. It doesn't mean there's no other God. Now, the Rebbe says in Shaykhut Bamuna, Ein Oid means there is nothing but God. Anytime there's another entity that we consider a separate entity, which is not Hashem, that is called idol worshiping, even though you definitely believe in God. But there's something else which you worship. There's something else that you consider a separate entity. And that's why haughtiness, what is haughtiness? I'm full of myself. You're considering yourself an entity. If you're considering yourself an entity, that's outside the realm of Hashem, and that's idol worshiping. And he says, Ella, what's the concept of idol worshiping? Idol worshiping, again, doesn't mean denying Hashem's existence, because the Gemara says, you do believe in God, but they consider themselves as a separate entity. I also exist. God exists and I exist. And with this, they separate themselves. The fact that they feel themselves as a separate entity, from the sanctity of Hashem, because they are not bottled to Hashem. They're not subjugated to Hashem. And therefore, Kedusha of above, meaning godliness, can only rest something which is completely nullified, subjugated, surrendered, whatever word you want to use, to Hashem. This, by the way, explains what the Alter Rebbe explains later in the Gersa Kodesh. Anger is also Avodah Zarah. Why? Why does a person get angry? You had no right to do it to me. God had no right to do it to me. If a person believes in Hashem and that the only existence in the world is Hashem, that means everything that happens in the world is coming from Hashem. And if this is happening to you, number one, you have to realize, not talk, feel that Hashem is doing it. And secondly, which is more important, if Hashem is doing it, it got to be good. So what is anger? Why did this happen to me? Well, since when do you exist? Since when do you exist? And if Hashem did it to you, who, let's say somebody tells you off. Who gave them the ability to open their mouth and talk? Who gave the ability to say the words that are cursing you out? Not Hashem, of course Hashem. You want to make them a separate entity? You want to make yourself a separate entity? That I don't deserve that? That's why a person gets angry. So really, in reality, anger and haughtiness are interconnected. Here the Alter Rebbe is only talking about haughtiness, because here the Alter Rebbe is bringing out a point. What is the definition of Kedusha? Surrendering to Hashem, bittul, subjugation, nullification. Meaning, not that I don't exist. You can go hit me, do whatever you want to me, because I don't exist. That's an idiot. It means any existence that exists in the world has to be subjugated to Hashem to do what Hashem wants. And when it does what Hashem wants, that's the bittul, that's the surrendering of themselves to godliness, which makes them a vessel. Once there's an I involved, I want, that's Avodah Zarah, the idol worship. What do you want? God says no. You believe in God? Yes. So what do you mean you want? Hashem doesn't want. Or the opposite. I don't want it, Hashem wants. That's idol worshiping. Therefore, like we learned, and this without Rebbe is explaining, Per Chof Aleph, he's going to explain again in Chof Gimel. Why were the first two commandments heard directly from Hashem? I am God, your God, and you should not have any other God. Why was that heard from Hashem directly? So the Alter Rebbe explains, because that's the essence of the whole Torah. Doing mitzvahs is surrendering my will to what Hashem's will is. That's in a positive way. I am Hashem, you're Hashem. So it's basically the root of all positive mitzvahs. Hashem says to me, do it, connect to me. So we do it, surrendering what I don't want to do it, and I'll do it anyway. That's called surrendering your ego, surrendering your Avodah Zarah. Hashem says, don't have any other gods. What does it mean, don't have any other gods? That Alter Rebbe explained. Don't have any separation from me. In other words, if Hashem says, don't eat pig, and you actively eat pig, Hashem says, don't think this, don't speak this, don't do this, and you do it, you're actively denying. It's a pretty sharp concept, but that's reality. It's actually contradicting the existence of Hashem. So if so, how can a person sin? We have in the Neshama, how is it possible for a person? A Yid is holy. So that's why the whole Batsi Lagani that's coming up in the Yud Shvat season speaks about the concept of Ein Adam Ever Avera Elam Kein Nichnes Beiruach Shtus. The Gemara Reish Lakish says a person can only sin because a foolish spirit comes into their head. It's called in modern day language temporary insanity. What's the temporary insanity? They think they're still connected. Okay, so I ate what I shouldn't. I said what I shouldn't. I thought what I shouldn't. I didn't do what they think, okay, come on, I'm still a Jew. I'm still a religious Jew. That's the mistake they're making. Every sin that a person does is denying the existence of God in God's face. You believe in God, he's omnipotent, omnipresent. God's all over the place. You believe in God, that means you believe God is watching me. So why in the world am I do something like Rabbi Yechman Zakir said in the Gemara? If a cop is watching you, you're not going to go through a red light. If you know the cop is watching you, you're not going to do it. And therefore, Rabbi Yechman Zakir on his deathbed, that we mentioned many times, told his students, when they said, give us advice for life, he said, Yiratin, may it be the will, you should fear God as much as you fear a human being. And the students were shocked. And they said, that's it? He said, Halavai, it should only be like that. And he told them, when somebody is watching you, you're not going to go steal in front of them. When somebody's watching you, you're not going to do something else. So the Alter Rebbe is explaining, and it's going to go more into it in Paragraph Gimel also. And that is, the Alter Rebbe explains, what is idol worshiping? Idol worshiping doesn't mean you take a big statue, a getchke, an idol, and you bow down to an idol. The Alter Rebbe is saying, no. Idol worshiping is infinitely more than that. Idol worshiping, Avodah Zarah, Elokim Achedim, that the second commandment says, don't have Elokim Achedim, don't have any other gods or gods that others make, or gods, the evil, that get their nourishment over the shoulder because they're not a vessel for godliness. Every sin a person does is denying the existence of God in God's face. That's called Avodah Zarah. That's idol worship. How could a Jew do it? Because they get temporary insanity. But in Judaism, it doesn't let you off the hook. In the civil court, sometimes they let you off the hook. They say you went with sugar, you went insane, and that's it. Every Jew sins, it's temporary insanity, the Gemara says. And yet we're punished for the sins. Why are we punished for the sins? Not to be punished. Because it's a purification process. It's a cleansing process. The Rebbe once spoke, it's a very interesting thing. The Rebbe once spoke, it's already printed. The Rebbe spoke once why there's no jail time in Torah law. There's the punishment of lashes, there's capital punishment, there's a punishment of monetary fines. There is no jail term as a punishment in Torah law. Yes, you find sometimes if a person, to keep him out of trouble, they'll put him into jail. Or if a person constantly did something else and they can't prove it, so they'll lock him up, not as a punishment for the crime. There's no jail term, 5 years, 10 years, life, or whatever. As to protect the public, to keep them off the street, but not as a punishment. The Rebbe said, why isn't jail term existing in Yiddishkeit? And the Rebbe explains a very beautiful concept. The purpose of a human being is to function in a constructive manner. That's the purpose of a human being. To function in the world in a constructive manner, to bring godliness into the world. Or if they're a non-Jew, to make the world civilized, like we discussed the other week. Jail term does nothing to the person. It's not a cleansing process. All it is, that I've explained, making them hardcore criminals. In fact, the Rebbe said, rather than locking them up in jail, you should have therapy and rehabilitation, to rehabilitate them, to get them back into the world where they belong. Locking somebody up, you're taking the purpose of a human being and not letting them do anything. The Rebbe said in Yiddishkeit is like this. You ate treif, you were warned, you brought evil on yourself, you dirt, to use that simple language, you need to be cleansed. How do you get cleansed? You get whipped, you lashes, you get cleansed. Certain times, capital punishment, and this is what the Rebbe said, sometimes capital punishment means, and by the way, there's no death row in Yiddishkeit. There is no death row where you stay there for 30 years until they kill you. In Torah law, the day they make the ruling that you're obligated to get killed, that day you get killed. They're not allowed to leave you over to the next day. The day the Beis Din rules, the Beis Din is 23 minimum, rules that you deserve capital punishment, that day you get killed. Why does the person get killed? You're taking away his function and purpose in the world. So the Rebbe explained there's certain sins that the person transgressed, and he was told, because warning in halacha, you can't get capital punishment without warning. Not only you have to warn him the sin, you have to warn him what the punishment is. So what do? You will come to a person who's about to commit a murder, let's say, God forbid, and you tell him you're not allowed to commit murder, and if you do it, you're going to be killed. And the person doesn't care, and they do it anyway. They forfeited their right to be a constructive human being in the world. So therefore you kill him. But there's no such thing as wasting somebody's time by putting him into jail. And how do we get into this? Because evil is the lack of bittul. And once you bring, and he says now, Ela lachein, therefore evil is called Ture de Pruda V'Zera Kodesh. It's called peaks of separation. Evil is called peaks, meaning they elevate themselves, they think they're great, but it's of separation from Hashem. This is real denial in the existence of Hashem. In reality, nothing exists. Nothing is worth anything. And everything is subjugated and surrendered to His will, and to Hashem and to His will. Hamachayas kulam, that makes everything alive. Umahava esim, not only makes them alive, but He actually creates their existence. From nothing into something. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe says like this: speech By us leaves us, by Hashem it doesn't. So why does Hashem call it speech? Because in reality, again, what Alter Rebbe is explaining over here, it never leaves Hashem. There is nothing but Hashem. And therefore, nothing ever left Hashem. There is no creation that left the outside of Hashem. The only thing that could leave the existence of Hashem, believe it or not, is a person who has free will that chooses to deny the existence of God, to create idol worshiping within himself. Again, not that you don't believe in God, but there's another entity besides Hashem, which most of the time is us, me. I want to do something. I don't care what Hashem wants. And then that is why it's called speech, because in their thought, it does become a separate entity, even though in reality it's not. Now the Alter Rebbe starts Perek Chov Gimel. In Kola now, based on what he explained before, Yuvan v'Yivor Heitev, will understand and will be explained properly. But Tesis Biur, an additional explanation, what Masha Elmer v'Zayar, but the Zayar says like this: Araisa v'Kutchebrichu Kul Echad. Torah and God are one. Upetikunim Pirshu, and Tikkun Zayar explains that Ramach Pikudin, the 248 positive mitzvahs, in Ramach Eivarim de Malk, are the 248 limbs of the king, because they're the mitzvahs of Pnimius Ratzanan. Okay, I'm going to explain this outside and then we'll see it inside. Here, in a little bit, Alter Rebbe is going to say the difference between learning Torah and mitzvahs. Torah is one with God. Mitzvahs are called the limbs of Hashem. Why are there 248 mitzvahs? Because there's kaviyachol, spiritually speaking, Hashem has 248 limbs. And why are there 365 negative mitzvahs? So the Rambam in his introduction writes, because there's 300, Rambam says this, Ramach mitzvahs correspond with the 248 limbs of Hashem. 365 negative mitzvahs, the Rambam says, refers to the days of the solar system, the solar calendar, which is 365 days, and meaning the Rambam says, every day says, don't sin on me. But in Kabbalah, it goes even more. The Arizal writes that the 365 negative commandments correspond with the 365 sinews or veins, whatever you want to call them, that exist in the body. Therefore, if you ever notice when they make a Mishaberach, they say Ramach Eivarov B'Shasa Gidov. 248 limbs, organs, 365 veins or sinews, whichever way you define it. Now, why did Hashem give us 248 mitzvahs? Come on, let him give us 10 mitzvahs and finish. And why not 249? And now why not 275? Why did Hashem give us 248 mitzvahs? Positive mitzvahs. So Chassidus and Kabbalah explain, because that corresponds with the 248 limbs of Hashem. What does it mean? Again, what are the limbs of Hashem? Hashem has limbs. Hashem has a body. He has veins. What does it mean? Explanation is very simple. Again, human terminology. What is a limb of a person? What is the hand? The hand is the vessel for the power of writing or giving or hitting. The nose is the limb to smell. You can't smell with your hands. You can't give with your nose. The eyes is the limb of seeing. You can't hear with your eyes. So what does it mean? the neshama, and the reason why, by the way, there's 248 limbs in a person. Why Jew and Goy alike? Because there has to be equality of bechira. Why are there 248 limbs in a man? Women have 252. Why? Because it corresponds with the 248 limbs of Hashem. So what's the purpose of a limb? A limb is to bring down, is the vessel for the power of sight that the soul has. The eyes are the limb for that power of sight. In other words, if you want to see, you need your eyes to be the vessel for the power of sight that the neshama has. You want to hear, the ears are the limb, meaning the vessel, the vehicle for the power of hearing of the neshama to come into the body. Hand, foot, stomach, 248 limbs that we have. Each limb uniquely is the vessel for that particular power of the soul and no other power. We said the nose is not the power, the vessel for sight or for hearing or for whatever. Now, when you speak about the 248 mitzvahs are the 248 limbs of Hashem, what does that mean? It means the limb brings down that power. There are 248 revelations of godliness that can come into the world. Each mitzvah is the unique vessel for that certain revelation of Hashem that no other mitzvah is. So therefore, when Hashem gives us mitzvahs, what mitzvah says, calling the limbs of Hashem mean, that is the vehicle for godliness to become revealed in the world. And because there's 248 revelations of Hashem that need to come into the world, there's 248 mitzvahs, positive mitzvahs, because these are the limbs, the organs, the vessels, the vehicles to bring down that level of godliness into the world, just like the eyes bring down the power of sight, and the mouth brings down the power of talking, and the nose brings down the power of smelling. So the same thing we call limbs, mitzvahs are the limbs of Hashem. What does that mean? These are the vehicles to reveal godliness in the world at that particular time. And therefore, interestingly, some mitzvahs we do daily. Some mitzvahs we do weekly. Some mitzvahs we do monthly. Some mitzvahs we do yearly. Some mitzvahs we do only 7 years, the laws of Shemitah. Some mitzvahs we only do Yovel every 50 years. Certain mitzvahs, and they're all part of the 248. Certain mitzvahs need to be brought down, that revelation daily. Some mitzvahs last, you do it once a week, it lasts until the next week. Then you have to do it again. You bench lulav and esrog on sukkahs. That revelation that you brought down lasts for the year. Next year, you're going to have to do it again. Tefillin, for a man, you have to do every day except Shabbos. Certain mitzvahs that are constant means the revelation needs to come down hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, whatever. Certain revelations once a year. The laws of Yom Kippur last once a year, and it lasts for the year. So that is the whole concept. To be continued in Mitzvah Shem next week. Once again, tonight's class is sponsored by Jeff Meisel and family in honor and memory of his father's yahrzeit, Gershom Moshe Ben Yehuda Neshama Shav and Aliyah. Everybody should have a good Shabbos. Everybody should stay healthy. And in Mitzvah Monday night, we'll have Parsha. And until then, everybody stay healthy and have a great week.